He is a professor in Applied English Department of Beijing International Studies University. He is the committee consultant for Beijing Speak Foreign Language Program and the founder of Ask Me proposal.
My plan was in the Ask Me program is that if I could teach them enough English so that when the Olympics came, they could serve at the in the volunteer.
He is in deep love with Chinese culture. He can speak very fluent Chinese and write traditional Chinese characters. He was awarded the Great Wall Friendship Award by Beijing municipal government. He was the first foreigner who has been selected to be one of the top 10 volunteers in Beijing, and he was the torch holder during 2008 Beijing Olympic Games.
I'm very, very proud of the work I do for the government as a volunteer.
His name is David Tu, and he has a famous Chinese name, Du Dawei, but his Chinese friends like to call him affectionately Lao Du.
Okay, Professor, I know you're talking about a lot about the error correction for the translation, but I think we should start from that. And, there is a starting point of this thing that you do that, and can you talk briefly talking about that? What makes you to do this?
Sure. I love Jingju, Beijing Opera,
yeah.
And one evening I was at an opera performance, and the mistakes, in the English were great. There were a lot of foreigners in the audience, and so the foreigners were laughing. They were laughing so hard that the non-professional actors on the stage were looking around, what's funny, what's happened, and so on. This was very distressing to me. First of all, I thought the Lao Wai were rude, but what upset me the most is it seemed to me that the manager of that theater didn't have sufficient respect for Chinese culture. And that it's very, very important that when we send the Lao Wai, we take the Lao Wai to the Beijing operas, that we must present this essence of Chinese culture with great respect, so the English must be correct. If the Chinese don't care enough to have it in correct English, then how can we expect the foreigners to respect it? So I wrote a letter to the Foreign Affairs Bureau, the government, the central government. And about a month later, somebody from the Beijing Foreign Affairs Office came and said they've received my letter. Thanks for the offer. In my letter, I said I would be willing to go to any Mingsheng Guji, any Bobo Guan, any Meishu Guan, and correct the English as a volunteer. And so the Beijing Foreign Affairs Office came and said, okay, we've got your letter, but would you be willing to go to the DTIA and also to the signage on the street and correct those with us? And I said, sure, I'd be happy to.
David Tu was a former U.S. Army colonel. Later, he became a Chinese culture and geography professor in the University of Southern California. In 1991, he determined to leave USC and go to China to teach in Lanzhou University. In 2001, David Tu came back to China again. This time, he started his teaching in Beijing International Studies University. From that date onward, he began his voluntary work to correct the English usage around Beijing's places of interest, streets, museums, and other public places. His commitment aroused great concern in the society. The people in Beijing used to call him English policeman. Today, the well-famed Du Dawei is used to correct English errors he sees in his daily life.
The purpose of a sign is to make some information clear. Okay, so it's not just a matter of spelling. It's not just a matter of the wrong word and so forth. Sometimes it's just a matter of space. So here's the spacing: Spanish teaching and research, Spanish and Portuguese department. At first, it's confusing. See, there should be more spaces. Spanish teaching and research, Spanish and Portuguese department. Here, simple spacing. Student affairs should be a space here. Spanish, there should be a dash or something.
Okay, you do this as a volunteer job.
But
Chinese people and the foreign people. How did they look at this thing? How did they think of this, that you do the error correction of translation?
Well, I don't know many Laowai. I don't hang out with the Laowai. You know, I came to China not to be with foreigners, but to do my thing in China.
What about the Chinese people?
Yeah, so I don't know. Before, you know, the idea about volunteerism has improved greatly since 2008 because of the Wenchuan earthquake and because of the Olympics.
Yeah, of course.
You know, much publicity was given to volunteerism. Okay, but earlier, many of my students ever wondered, why are you wasting your time doing this? What's so important about it? But I must say that when I went to the shops and the businesses and talked to the owners about their signage outside, they were very, very courteous and they were very delighted, and they would correct those mistakes instantly. I mean, very, very quickly, within minutes, within hours. If you have time, I can tell you a very interesting story about how quickly.
Okay.
Okay, there was a reporter for a French and a Netherlands publication, and they called me up one day and they said, we would like to have you show us some mistakes, the signage mistakes. And I said, okay, meet me at Yashou. Yeah, at Sanlitore. So I went to Yashou and looked around to see if I could find some mistakes, and of course I found some mistakes at that time. So I went into two shops, and I told the owners, I said, you know, the Olympics is coming, and you have these mistakes. And then I left and went back to meet the reporter, you see. And I met the reporter and came back to these shops, and they had all corrected the errors.
Okay,
they had either corrected the errors by writing or simply taken the signs down. It was a wonderful, wonderful thing to be able to show the Western media, you see, because the Chinese wanted to make sure it's very correct because the Olympics is coming, you see, and they did it this fast.
Yeah.
It's very, very fast. And so I had absolutely no problems with any shopkeeper, even the hospitals and so forth. People were very anxious to make sure that we had the best possible face, you know, for the foreigners.
Yeah.
So it made a great story, and I was totally delighted to be able to prove this to the foreigners.
Do you think there is some places in Beijing that need to further improve this kind of work?
Well, I often say that anything related to the infrastructure, you know, like the roads, the highways, the subways, the buses, and so forth, that is quite correct. Anything related to public safety, you know, peng to, those kind of things, so, you know, emergency exit, that's all correct. Some of the private business stuff is not correct, but that's, you know, that's an individual companies or individual shops business. Personally, I'm not terribly worried about that. Right now, the most important thing for me is the cultural sites, the Boboguan and the Mingshengguji. You see, the Chinese are always talking about 5,000 years of history. But sometimes you don't make it very easy for the Laowai to figure this out for themselves, you know. Sometimes the Daoyo don't know all the questions, you see. So if we make the explanations at the Mingshengguji and the Boguan, the museums and the culture sites, if we make those very clear, then as the Laowai goes through a museum or a culture site, they see the things in which they are interested, and they read this, you see. And if it's clear and interesting, then they learn a great deal. They learn more. And it's how we, I don't know how you say it, it's how we grab their hearts or we grab their minds, you see. And there's some very common mistakes that I can give you very quickly. The 17th year of the Yongle reign, before we began this work at Gugong, every building, or the major building, said this was constructed, I think I'm correct, in the 16th or the 17th year of the Yongle reign. Who in the world knows? How many Chinese know the 17th year of the Yongle reign? I bet you don't know.
No.
Okay. You think the Laowai knows? Absolutely not. You see? So if you go to a building that says this was constructed in the 17th year of the Yongle reign, it means nothing to a foreigner. But if you say this building was constructed in 1420, oh my gosh. You see, then an American can say, oh my gosh, this building was built 76 years before America was even discovered.
Yeah.
And so it puts it into a historical perspective, you see what I mean? I mean, if you talk about, we say during the Han Dynasty, even the Han Dynasty, you all know, Chinese know when the Han Dynasty was, about 200 BC to AD. Americans don't know that.
Yeah.
Europeans don't know that. But if you give it a date, if you say the dates of the Han Dynasty, then all Americans and most Americans and all Europeans know that was during the Roman Dynasty, during the, the Roman Empire. And so it gives them a real picture of how ancient, the Chinese society is, you see.
Yeah.
So one of the biggest things we can do to improve the Lao-wise understanding of the depth, the breadth, and the age of Chinese culture is to make sure that we use terminology that they can understand. Don't use reign dates. And don't use just the name of the dynasty, give the dates. Always give the dates so that they can put into perspective their own history, you see. And it's a very, very important thing is don't always tell the Lao-Wai what you think they should know. Let the Lao-Wai ask what they want to know, you see.
Yeah.
Because then they start from their own interest and they build on that interest, that adds to their interest. If you tell them something you think they may want to know, but they're not interested in it, it's just lost, you see. You must give the Lao-Wai the chance, the foreigner, you must give the foreigner the chance to ask you the questions they want.
And have you ever correct the Chinese translation abroad?
No, because my Chinese is good enough. We do have this kind of problem in the United States, but I know for a fact that our university, I mean, most in America, if somebody's going to put up a sign, they usually call the local university and ask for the people who speak the language. So at my university in Los Angeles, there's a list of people. A shopkeeper, somebody calls and says we need a translation, then they call the first name on the list, so that it's always translated by native speakers. So the Chinese who are studying there, are the Chinese foreign students, I mean Chinese who go to America and study, those are people on the top of the list for being called to make the corrections. If you don't use a native speaker, you always make a mistake. And sometimes if you don't use the native speaker, like in America, our biggest problem is with Spanish in Southern California because we have many Spanish. If you don't talk to the native speakers, you make some very stupid mistakes, you see. So I know that lesson. That model should be that if somebody needs it, they should call RY or BY and talk to the language specialist. We've got a sign we need corrected, then they should call BY.
Okay, so much about the error correction. You were officer in the military.
Yes.
Okay, and then I saw you teaching the South California University.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And how did you transfer from the officer to a university professor?
Well, that's a kind of a long story. We'll try to make it short. I think the best teachers are teachers who know the world. And I wanted to be a history teacher. And my 我本科的专业是德语和德国历史. So I joined the army to be hoping to be sent to Germany, but they sent me to Vietnam. Well, while I was in Vietnam, I was totally fascinated with Vietnam. And so when I came back to America, I wanted to study Vietnamese history. But I met a wonderful friend. His name was Chen. He used to be the president of Fujian University. And he said, Dave, if you want to understand Vietnam, if you want to understand Japan, if you want to understand Korea, you must first understand China.
Yeah.
And so I applied for and got a generous scholarship to study Chinese cultural geography. But after 20 years, I was tired of that. And so I had a party and I invited some Chinese friends. And one of these friends brought a friend, and he was from Lanzhou University. So he said, Lao Du, if you want to go to China, I can get you an invitation. So he got me an invitation to come to Lanzhou University, because 我的研究生的专业是黄河. My graduate student specialty is the Yellow River. So I was totally delighted to be able to go and teach at Lanzhou University because it's right beside the Yellow River.
Yeah.
So I got that invitation. I was there for 3 years.
Vietnam War taught David Chu how to respect life and understand its meaning. He has an interesting quote: "Life is extended by children, but knowledge inherited by students." Thus, teaching has naturally become the career of his life. David Chu tries to use the teaching method that is suitable for Chinese students. According to their weakness, the main concerns of his teaching are based on developing the students' research capacity and skills to think independently and critically.
And you teach in the U.S. and teach in China, both in college. And what's the difference between the two countries? Education. I mean,
well, the education systems are very different. In China, the students tend to just sit there and have the teacher tell them what's important. In the American universities, the students are always asking questions. But sir, I think so and so and so. You know, but why isn't it this? Why isn't it that? They ask many questions.
Do you think
so
the reason is that Chinese university have too many students in one class?
Yeah, you see, the problem is the basis for both for Western education and Chinese education is pretty much the same. 为什么？因为孔子 and Socrates. We think in the West our greatest teacher was Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. You see, those Shilada. And their teaching technique was question and answer, question and answer. And that was Confucius's way of teaching also, question and answer. But sometime during the period, it became more important to study the Confucian classics, and you just memorize this, you learn this, you see. And you don't ask questions, you just memorize. And that is still pretty much the teaching system in China. It's changing, and it needs to change. We need to go back to the Confucius way of teaching. We need to encourage the students to ask questions. You see, the answer to a question is always kept in the mind much longer, much stronger than the information that's simply given to you. You see what I mean? If I tell you something, you're not going to remember that nearly as long as if you asked me a question and I gave you that same answer, you see. So we must go back to the old Confucius way of teaching. We need to allow the students, encourage the students to ask questions, to become interested in it so that they will learn it much more deeply and they can think about it.
In China, that the education resources
education is what?
Education resources in China is imbalanced.
Education resources?
Yeah. Do you think these kind of things ever happened in the U.S.?
Oh, sure. I mean, the best universities pay the best prices, they get the best teachers, you see. The 高中学, the 中学, the 小学, and the richest communities have the better programs and so. Excuse me. It's just common. I don't know. I mean, you just have to move the resources around as best you can. China has a huge population. It's got a lot of little communities and so forth that need improvement in their teaching. But I think, you know, there are all sorts of volunteer programs, and there are also charity programs, you know, to try to help improve those universities. It is a problem, but as the economy improves, as the nation becomes more and more richer, it will be able to solve that problem, just like the United States and Europe have pretty much solved that problem, you see. Yes, the imbalance isn't so great. I mean, it's true, New York and Los Angeles schools are probably better than schools out in the countryside someplace, but the imbalance is not so great there. In China, perhaps it's quite huge between Beijing, Shanghai, and Dingxi, Gansu provinces. I mean, but as the entire population becomes more and more wealthy, you know, more better off, the well-off society, those things will improve. It's natural.
For China, how to balance? Just to increase, or just that you mentioned to move the resources?
Yeah, I think you need to, you know, how do we do it in the West? You get wealthy people to donate. You get many people to donate things. You realize we've got a special problem here, then you try to encourage volunteer teachers to go there. You try to encourage people who really want to make a difference. They want to get out of the city, they want to be of service to the society. Ask those people, open the situation so that those folks can go there, you see what I mean? There are many kinds of programs that you can do that. Encouraging volunteerism, you see, is a very important thing. And this is why the earthquake, the Wenchuan earthquake, was a terrible thing. But I think it was a great stimulus for volunteerism in China. And the media did a fantastic job of showing all these volunteers and their work and their sacrifice and so forth. And some of the volunteers were killed, you know, in subsequent aftershocks. These people were heroes. And I think never before has China actually put so much emphasis on the dignity and on the great service of volunteers, you see. And then with the Olympics coming along, everybody, including myself and my wife, we were all excited to be volunteers, you see. So we need to build on this. We need to tell the graduating college students, come to the countryside, you know, share your knowledge and so forth with these schools who can't afford to get, you know, the best quality teachers and so forth and so on. And I think if we make a good program like that, if the government becomes completely aware of the needs and what we can do, we can improve this situation dramatically. Yeah. As a matter of fact, when I retire, I would like to go to the countryside and teach in a Shaoshui or a Gaozhong Shui.
That's very nice.
I like the countryside much better than the city. I'm a country boy, not a city boy.
David too is a big fan of Chinese culture. He likes to wear Tang suit. He likes speaking opera. Once he required his students to watch the opera Sanchakou and even brought it to the test content. He loves all kinds of traditional Chinese culture elements, like ancient Beijing's hutong and the old bricks line in the foot of the city wall of Yuan Dynasty. His house is packed out by traditional Chinese furniture, opera faces hanging on the doors, antique screen dangling on the wall. In China, maybe you can't find a second foreigner who knows better regarding appreciating Chinese culture.
BTV or CCTV asked me to do some shufa, so I really have great respect for Chinese shufa, and I'm not very good. So this is why, so this is why it's a little embarrassing. But this is terrible, this is even worse, but the only thing I like is this one downstroke here, you see?
Okay.
And I think that's so good.
But did you know that which dynasty this kind of writing is from?
Well, this is Li Shu.
Li Shu.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, there's lots of elements in the Chinese culture, and do you there's something that elements that you like most?
What I like most is the definition of a gentleman.
Definition of the
Chinese traditional definition of a gentleman is a man who knows poetry, can write poetry, can do shufa, you know, can carve his own seal, maybe even have a garden, a special garden, you know, is special, and is well educated. Well, and this is an ideal I like very much. In the West, the ideal tends to be the a man opens the door for a lady, and they say, oh, he's a real gentleman. It's a very shallow kind of definition of a gentleman. I realize that in the West it's not just that, but I like very much what I consider the definition of a traditional Chinese gentleman. You know, appreciation of the arts, knows how to do these things themselves, you see, and is talented, and plays the guqin. All these kinds of things. See, these are all components of a gentleman, and I like that very much. And I myself am striving for that, but I'm very, very slow at getting there.
Do you think there is a gap between the traditional Chinese culture and contemporary Chinese culture?
Oh yeah, I do.
How?
I think the education system is one of them, and I think the appreciation, Global Times and Beijing, I forgot what anyway, they recently published a survey, and they showed that in the third rank, who is the most popular, who's the most respected in Chinese society? The most respected are skilled workers. In the third tier are cultural workers and educators, teachers and so forth, you see. I think in traditional Chinese society, the educated man, the educated person, you know, was much more respected and was a kind of a model for society, you see. Today, I think, as in many societies, money has become more important than education, and then civility, than culture and so forth, you see what I mean? So it's difficult. But I think this is another value of Hanban, of the Confucius' society is that they are teaching the traditional Chinese values, you see, and helping people better understand. The business about money being more important than education and so forth is a problem all over the world. It's not just a Chinese issue.
How to inherit the traditional Chinese culture?
Well, I think a very important thing is that I have said before that the Hanban is doing a great job of spreading Chinese culture. But one problem we have is that we must do a better job of teaching the Chinese young people Chinese culture. See, something I always say is that globalization doesn't have to be Westernization. Globalization can also be Sinification.
Yes.
You know, we can teach the rest of the world how to. But I am quite disappointed when I talk to the students and so forth, and they all know nobody wants to go to the Jingju. Nobody wants to see a Beijing opera. Mm-hmm. Very, very few do. But everybody watches Prison Break or Sex in the City, Gossip Girl, whatever it is. You know, they all know that right away. And unfortunately, not only the students, but also the young teachers. The young teachers are very interested in those. And the young teachers themselves, they choose those things to show to the class. Yeah. There needs to be some way that we can go back to, it doesn't have to be looked on as something old-fashioned. A couple of years ago, I saw a modernization of Baishe Zhuan. Yeah. It was marvelous. I think we need to do more of that. Because it had a modern symphony orchestra. It had the real actors and so forth, but it also had movie dramatics behind it and so forth. It was very, very Shendaida. It was very, very modern. And I think I would like to see the Chinese cultural experts spend more time on trying to update, not change it, but update the presentation techniques. And one of the ways of doing that is like with this new version of Baishe Zhuan, is modernize it and make it exciting and interesting.
Since 2001, David too has been living in Beijing for 10 years, during which he witnesses the remarkable Beijing Olympic Games and the city's 10 years growth. Today, to this Native American, China has become his second hometown, shuttling between Western and Eastern cultures. David too is known as an ambassador bridging the two very different cultures.
What's the most different part for the people living in China and living in the Western world?
My biggest problem is in China, I'm a lonely old man. I live in an apartment building and I can't receive guests, I mean, in the evening and so forth. In America, I have a family, I have grandchildren, that kind of business, so it's a vast different thing. But I must say that in China, I feel much more useful than I do in America. Because America, I mean, there are a lot of, who needs to study English, and we've already got so many volunteer programs and so forth, and so you see. So I can come to China, I can teach English, I can teach analytical thinking. I can do it in a way that helps the students become more active. I can work with the old folks in the community to give them some volunteer opportunities and so forth, And very, very important to me, I can work in the museums, the Mingshan Guji and the Boguan, and help China explain itself, its culture to the West. So life is dramatically different than it is back home, you see.
Yeah. How many years do you live in Beijing?
I've been in Beijing 10 years now. 10 years. I was in Lanzhou for 3 years.
What Beijing changed
during
the 10 years?
The biggest one. Well, I mean, just the skyline. The skyline is incredible. Okay. I mean, look at all those buildings and so forth. And of course, the English signage has changed dramatically. Okay. The English signage is wonderful.
Yeah, more correct.
More correct, absolutely.
Can you tell us something about your family? Where's your family member now?
Sure. All my family is in America. My wife has not retired yet. She's still working, and she lives in Los Angeles. My daughter is a lawyer in Los Angeles. My son teaches at Berkeley University.
Berkeley.
Okay. He's a Taozi Yishuja. His specialty is ceramics. And his wife, my daughter-in-law, is also a ceramicist. And my Sunzi, his name is Zhou. And he's been to Beijing twice, and he's learning Chinese, as is my Ershifu, my daughter-in-law. And so, he can say yeah, 再见, 不要, 谢谢, so. And he's very, very popular in San Francisco because he's very handsome, very blonde, and he sees a Chinese on the street and he says 你好, and they go crazy. 可爱.
Okay, just as you saying, we are a website, and the people on the website know that we are going to interview you, and they gave several questions.
Oh, really?
Okay. The person who named 中国画画. His question is, which do you like, per officer and university teacher?
I'm very proud of my military service, because for me and for what I think Americans is, we think about preserving the peace. For that aspect, I'm very happy. But I'm much more interested in teaching than I am in military issues, because I think it's as important as peacekeeping is in defense and so forth. I think teaching young people how to think, improving their lives, and helping intercultural communication, understanding is very, very much. It's as important, more important, because if we understand each other, if we all understand each other in our cultures, then we have more trust, we have less distrust, less suspicion, and therefore we have more peace.
Do you think to be a teacher is a better way to preserve peace?
Of course.
Okay. Well, we goes to the third question, and the person who named the Swanstone and ask you if your foreign friend first come to China, and do you have some places or food to recommend?
Yeah, I love matoir. You know matoir?
Matoir. Is this?
对，可是里面的是黑芝麻. If it's 黑芝麻, that's the best. Yeah, I love matoir. I don't eat too much matoir because I'm already too fat. Places to see, everybody wants to see Tiantan, Gugong, the Great Wall, and so forth. But there are some other very beautiful places that. My favorite places are Zhihuasi. Zhihuasi is the oldest wooden structure in Beijing. It's the oldest wooden structure. Every wooden structure in Gugong is burned. It's 1466, I think, is the date of Zhihuasi. And those buildings have not burned.
Made of wood.
Made of wood. It's the oldest wooden structure in Beijing. Also, Yuan Dadu. Yuan Dadu. It's nothing particular about China, but there's a very beautiful scene when you're walking. It used to be the old city. Have you been to Yuan Dadu?
No.
Yeah.
Not yet.
Okay, it's a very beautiful scene. You look at, there's the old dirt part of the wall, But anyway, they have these beautiful trees there, and you look across the canal, you look across the moat, and there are these. It's a beautiful, peaceful sight right in the middle of the city. I love it.
You love it very much?
Yeah, I do, very much.
Okay, Professor, can you give us a sentence, very simple Chinese sentence, and write it down, teach the people on the website?
Very simple. This is, 我的说法非常不好，就是一点不好意思. This is embarrassing, but I'll give you a very simple sentence.
Okay.
我爱北京. I'm not sure that's even the right tone. 我爱北京. 我爱北京天安门长太阳升. 什么？
欢迎登录网络孔子学院。如果你喜欢汉语，喜欢中国文化，就跟我们一起来吧。
新年快乐，祝你健康，万事如意。